Tunisian university used, by the way, to be one of the most prominent under the Ancien Régime among the Arab countries. What is presently happening in Tunisian university is a scandal. There is no other word to describe it. When you have bands of bandits coming to force professors to adapt their program in order to follow Sharia, when you have these same bandits forcing female students to wear an Islamic veil, whereas they used to be free before. This is a scandal, and there is no other word for that. We have to support this movement because they represent an enormous potential. But we have also to be very vigilant, because things are happening that are not exactly in our interest. But I would be cynical and say, actually, that former French Foreign Minister, Mr. Juppé, was quite right when he said in an interview that we are going, we Europeans, to learn how to negotiate with fundamental Islam. I think this will be a necessity for us in the coming years. Whether we like these parties or not, whether we share their values or not, they will be our partners, and we are going to have to negotiate with them on a constructive basis. The issue is also that there is not one picture in the Arab world. It is very much contrasted. And whereas we see disappointing results with some, we see also encouraging results with others. If you refer to the elections in Libya, the outcome was not that bad, with the liberals emerging as basically the victorious party. So we have to be careful and not condemn at once. We have to be very careful and examine the case of country per country. And one of these countries, Syria, undergoes a situation, undergoes a war, let us call it this way, because it is now a civil war, that is particularly tragic. I say it is particularly tragic because when you realize that there is absolutely no prospect of political solution. The Security Council in the United Nations has nothing to offer, nothing. And this is now lasting for months. Can you imagine the situation of the people inside Syria when they realize that nobody comes to their help? There are promises, yes. There are some form of help by some Gulf countries. There are also some form of support coming from some Western countries, very small. But there is basically nothing substantial that is done there by the international community. And that is the reason why Didier Reynders had the initiative of thinking of a new measure for Syria, a purely humanitarian measure. Our prospect is not to try to put at the same level the regime of Bashar al-Assad and the opponents. This is not our game. What we would like to wake up the international community at is the necessity to have at least some standards of Geneva rights, of the Geneva Conventions, applied in Syria. At least some. And we are working very hard with RCRC, with international humanitarian organizations such as OCHA, World Health Organizations, and others. They are supporting us a lot. A lot of other countries start to understand that what we propose is basically not to undermine what was achieved in terms of political work in the Security Council before, but really to go for the humanitarian relief only. We have already some very active supports by the European partners, at least when they are taken as a group. They have issued several conclusions on the initiative that were positive. We have also the support of the United States of America that wished us, in a fair way, good luck with the Russians. And indeed, we are going to have, and we have started our dialogue with the Russians, not an easy one, but it's a constructive one. We have a lot of support from the Arab world, and that is very positive, particularly from the League of Arab Nations, where we found a lot of very useful and constructive support. We are not going to succeed overnight. This is an extremely difficult challenge, but I think that we have to do it. We have to wake up the international community at the disastrous humanitarian situation endured by the Syrian population. We have at least to provide these poor people with hospitals where they can be treated, with hospitals that are guaranteed by both the Syrian Red Crescent and the RCRC. We'll see how we can further develop. This is a work in progress. I do not have any crystal ball that would tell me that will be the end result, but we are definitely going to continue and not abandon this case. Africa, as you know, is a terrain where Belgium has developed some expertise over the years. And this minister, Didier Reynders, immediately when he took office, was confronted with the question of attending or not the ceremony for the inauguration of President Kabila, basically in a word, with approving or not the elections in Congo. Elections that, as you know, were heavily criticized all over the world for shortcomings. Basically, his reaction was immediate. I have to go to Congo, meet the Congolese, the political class, the president, the soon-to-be government, but also the opposition. It would be nonsense from Belgium, whereas we have advocated elections and more democracy in Congo for years. Now that they have gone through this process of elections, despite the shortcomings, it would be foolish and irresponsible not to go to Congo. And by the way, when you look at the history of Congo since independence, there were not that many elections, basically 3, and the last one was the one that was certainly the best, taking into account that the previous one took place in the climate of civil war, and I do not have to refer to those of 1960. So that at least we had a process of elections, imperfect, yes. We told it to the Congolese. But there was a process of election, and there was a president and a government. That's the reason why the minister went to Congo. He didn't hide to the Congolese what he was expecting from them. When you see in the newspaper that there is a honeymoon between Reynders and the Congolese government, this is not entirely true. There are good contacts, absolutely, but this is also the case that the minister keeps on advocating to the Congolese people and the Congolese authorities what they have to do to put their house in order, more particularly in the case of democracy, in the case of fight against corruption, in the case of reorganization, particularly of the security sector. Security sector reforms are absolutely key in Congo. And because of this security sector that proved so sensitive, the minister went to the most sensitive area of Congo, the east, in the Kivus. And he had there contacts with the local population, contacts with the humanitarians, the famous Dr. Mukwege, who is doing the work of a saint in eastern Congo, and an incredibly good humanitarian work. He had also contacts with authorities in Rwanda. The purpose, as he has advocated so many times, was not to put Rwanda government in a corner and put the blame on them, having some sort of absolutely useless blame game on Rwanda. Not. We were prepared to believe the Rwanda government when they said that they were no part of this destabilization of the Kivu region through movements like M23 and so on. We were prepared and we told them, if you are not part of the problem, then be a part of the solution. The minister repeated that. It's true also to say that what we have attended so far from the Rwandan government was disappointing. Instead of responding in the way we had expected and they had promised us to do, they have opted for an much less constructive way by attacking personally Minister Reinders and blaming him for being too much pro-Congolese. It is not true, it is unfair, but there too we count on the European Union to have one coherent policy towards Africa of the Great Lakes. We will have to review soon the situation of aid to Rwanda. We do not know yet what the situation will be. We are certainly not going to cut off aid to NGOs that are performing a fantastic work in Rwanda. But we will probably, together with the European partners, and as a logical consequence of the Sanction Committee of the United Nations, to review what our government-to-government aid is. My very last point, after Africa, will be the review of our diplomatic network. This is not something particular. Those among you in the audience who are or were my colleagues know that this is an exercise that every Ministry of Foreign Affairs conducts perpetually. We have always to adjust our network. But this time we took it in a more ambitious way. We had the administration conducting a very wide survey of all our missions abroad with our political interest, commercial interest, consular interest, and our contribution to overseas development aid. That was our objective basis, to review basically what our network is and should be. Not going to go into the details, but I would like to tell you that by doing this exercise, the minister immediately thought of cooperating, first of all, with the two Benelux partners. The two of them are very much demanding. They have to basically achieve important savings and budget cuts in their respective ministries. So they are demanding for further cooperation. We are now at the beginning of this exploration, but we have already some interesting tracks that we explore, like for instance the concept of Benelux House, a bit on the basis of the Nordic houses that you may have seen in several capitals, where Nordic countries share common premises and share the cost of common premises with one welcome desk, one central management for the building, and basically the different embassies being located in the same building. It is quite a substantial source of saving that we are contemplating there. We are also contemplating, together with the exercise in 2013 of the review of the External Action Service, how we are going to work further, better among EU member states, together with these EU DELs that are spread all over the world. We haven't reached unanimity yet on that particular front, but you have to know that several countries, several member states are clearly targeting a better consular cooperation thanks to the EU DELs. It's not yet the case because several member states oppose it fiercely. But, you know, it's always the same problem in Europe. You have allegedly the big member states and the small member states. But and I will use it as a word of end for my presentation, as Paul-Henri Spaak used to say, no, you do not have small member states and big member states. You have member states, and all of them are small, but some have already understood it, and some others not yet. Thank you very much.
So the Chief of Cabinet, after this very interesting and straightforward intervention, is going to take some questions. For whom is the first one? Thierry Mules. Can somebody take him the microphone? Give him the microphone.
I would like to go back what you said about the westward move.
Yes.
My question is, among many points that you mentioned, the necessity of more integration and sharing sovereignty on all the issues you reminded. And we all know that there are more and more two kinds of Europes. You have the Eurozone and you have the 27. So in a way we are going back to a former time of the AELE and what we use the marché commun, that's the 6th. And I would like to know if among this Westphal group, the 11 countries you mentioned, are all members of the 17 or are there some of the 27? Why I'm asking this question is that I think one of the points of the agenda of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of this group should we to have, I don't pretend, 2 commissions, but at least a commission which is more integrated for the common problems we have among the 17. Should we have, for instance, as Mr. Attali mentioned the other day in some newspaper, 2 parliaments, one in Brussels for the 17, for having a more control, democratic control of this integration, and the other one maybe in Strasbourg for the parliament of the 27th. Should we have a commission more democratically represented, since probably in the future they have to control massive investments in the sense you said to the economical recovery of our Eurozone? Is this not the main point of should be discussed among this Westphal group? Wondering about that. Thank you.
Shall I respond?
Oui,
Okay.
oui.
Well, you're actually quite right with your question, and there are 2 elements there that I would like to pinpoint. First, the 2 Europes that you mentioned, and second, the organization of the Commission. I think, that Europe, the EU, progresses through crisis. It is well known. And I think that we are now living historic times in the sense that we are basically attending the emergence of what the EU will look like tomorrow. You remember the famous theory of concentric circles developed by François Mitterrand? Well, that is precisely that. I believe that more and more there will be a greater coherence, a greater share of sovereignty among the member states of the Eurozone that are going to represent the core of the European Union. And then you will have those that are not members, and I would classify them in the opt-ins and the opt-outs. Basically, this makes 3 groups of member states for the single EU, but nonetheless, we are going to see around the core of the Eurozone the further development of the European Union. It will not be easy, and certainly not easy when we think of the institutional organization. Because if we have to multiply commissions, multiply parliaments, executive bodies here and there, it will be awfully difficult. Let us have a look now at the situation we presently have with the Commission, where 27 commissioners sit around the table with the President. I mean, have you ever seen a large multinational companies with an executive board where 27 persons have the same power? That would be a nightmare. They would never be able to take any sound decision. We have to reorganize the Commission. Having 1 commissioner per member state will no longer be acceptable for many years. So there will be there indeed a process of democracy that will be needed in order to designate the commissioners. Commissioners will have to be indeed quite clearly democratically backed, legitimized. But it will be no longer possible to have a commission where all member states are represented. It's just one example. But you take the institution and you name it, and you have another example. So we are just at the beginning of this major EU reorganization. But as I told you, I believe the new core will be the Eurozone, and we have definitely to count on a reorganized Commission. That are certainly 2 tracks that was heavily discussed among ministers of this Westerwelle group.
Ambassador Robert van der Meulenbroek.
Thank you very much. I beg to differ on some of your comments with regard to countries, Arab Spring type countries. First, Tunisia. I'll be very short. Al-Nahda is not a fundamental Islamist party. It's a moderate Islamist party. The party won the election fair and square, and the fundamental Islamist parties lost the election. Now, the incidents you were referring to have happened. I do not deny it, but these were isolated acts. For the moment, the new constitution of Tunisia is being written, and let's judge them upon the facts. I'm far more concerned by another country I didn't very much hear of. Syria, of course, is a case apart, so I will not dwell on Syria, but Libya. There were no institutions in Libya when Gaddafi fell last year. The institutions was the great man himself. There was nothing. There are, for the moment, about 20 million weapons in Libya, everywhere. Among the tribes, an American ambassador and a few of his colleagues have been murdered. There have been skirmishes all over the country in the last few weeks, even attacks in Tripoli. And may I remind that the south is another country which is rather in turmoil, and that is Mali. So I think we should be really more worried about the developments in Libya than in Tunisia.
Okay, don't misunderstand me. I never said Ennahda itself was a radical party. I said they did not oppose facts by bandits coming from radical Muslim parties. And as a party of government, their duty was to be firm and strict and oppose what was happening in universities. I totally disagree with you. There were not isolated incidents. The reports we have tell us exactly the contrary. These were widespread incidents. And Ennahda didn't counter them, despite the fact that themselves, I fully agree with you, are not a party of radical Islam, but they allowed radical Muslims to act freely, and that was to be condemned. Regarding Libya, I told you it was not possible for me to review all the themes of our diplomatic lines, but I fully agree with you. We have a major problem with spread of weapons. The first measures Didier Reynders took regarding Libya was to join an American program called Manpad for the search of basically these weapons that you put on your shoulder and for which you can be used against tanks or helicopters, that are rather sophisticated weapons. 200 of them were missing after the end of the war, and we had to find them back. The Americans needed support, particularly expertise and money, and we immediately joined the program, realizing that indeed there was there a serious problem with the spread of these weapons. Regarding Mali, you are also quite right that some of these weapons, and when I say some, it's massive some, were indeed spread all over the Sahel region, down to West Africa, country like Mali and others around the Sahel region. You know that for many years already, there is in discussion in the EU the concept of a mission to Mali in order to tackle several threats that are threats to us, to security in the EU, in the Sahel regions. These are terrorism, these are drug smuggling, and also illegal migration. Drug smuggling is mainly coming from Central and Latin America, landing somewhere there on the shore of some West African countries, and then taking the route northwards towards Europe. There is already one mission of the EU to which Belgium contributes. The name is EUCAP Niger, that was launched under CSDP framework, and where we have a participation of the Belgian Federal Police. This mission is tackling the issue of drugs and illegal migration. The second mission, the one targeting more particularly the issue of terrorism, this one is being organized. And as you may have heard in the press and in the media, Belgium has immediately declared its readiness to contribute. We haven't yet made any formal decision, understand me well on that. We haven't made any formal decision because we have not yet received the kind of practical contribution we are going to deliver to this mission. The mission, by the way, is not yet established. We have sent the first liaison officers to West Africa, and by the way, among those dispatched there is one Belgian lieutenant colonel who is now basically canvassing the situation from his base in West Africa. We count very much on his report, by the way, to also examine very carefully what kind of contribution is expected from us and where we can realistically deliver something. But indeed, we are there in full solidarity with other EU member states, because we realize that the threat of terrorism is not only against France, it's a threat for the whole of the EU security. We are prepared with open mind to consider the request for contribution that will be addressed to us, but for that we still have to wait a few more weeks that the situation is finalized in the EU framework.
There is a third question, but I first would like to find out whether somebody else wants to raise a question so that we can organize. So I will take you, and then Admiral, you will be the last one. Thank you. Will you please introduce yourself?
Bonsoir, Monsieur le chef du cabinet. Il m'intéresse la position, le comportement de Belgique vis-à-vis de l'élargissement de l'Union européenne avec les pays des Balkans occidentaux, y compris la République de Macédoine. Mon pays, je suis de l'ambassade de Macédoine. Merci beaucoup.
Can the answer be in English or in French?
En français, comme vous voulez.
If there is no problem for the audience, okay.
Oui, moi je ferai en anglais. En anglais? Oui, il y a des gens qui ne
Okay,
comprennent pas.
no problem. So then I will stick to English because I think it's a common language for your lecture here anyway. It's a good question that you have there about enlargement of the EU and more particularly the situation in the Western Balkans. First of all, a general answer, and then particularly the case of Macedonia. I think that when you consider enlargement, and particularly the case of Western Balkans, you realize that with enlargement, the EU has never had any more successful, any policy that is more successful than that one. Through the aspiration of candidate member states to membership of the EU, we have managed not only to bring about political stability, but also a very impressive economic catch-up for these countries. So I believe that indeed this is probably, as far as external policies of the European Union are concerned, the most successful one, enlargement. And the case of Western Balkan is probably the most illustrative among all cases of enlargement that we have known since the creation of the EU. Now, regarding the case of Macedonia, you, better than me, know what are the situation that is presently, I would say, not blocking, but let's say seriously breaking the progress of Macedonia, and that is the issue that you have with Greece. Now, I mean, this is an issue that, and I can perfectly understand that, is extremely sensitive for Macedonian people and also for Greek people. We have to realize that even if we in Belgium sometimes feel a bit, let's say, surprised by the fact that the name of an airport or the name of a highway could be a problem for joining the EU or not. Well, it is a serious psychological issue there, and we have to realize that. By the way, who knows, or you understand, there in Macedonia, the problems we have between the Flemings and the Walloons. So maybe it's exactly the same situation for you. But I believe that no further progress will be achieved as long as we are blocked in this situation between Macedonia and Greece. You know that there are tracks to be exploited. You know that there are possibilities of solution that already exist. It's a question of political will. It's a question of mentality sometimes, and you do not decree a mentality change. I know it's not easy. But I believe that on the long term, prospects are there. One final remark. We in Belgium, though we have always been, and rightly so, considered as strong advocates of the European integration and European enlargement as well, we have become in the recent years much more strict. You may have seen, you may have attended this shift in our policy. Well, I believe that it was largely justified by the fact that we may have in the past have been a bit too hasty with some enlargements. You know, there's a big difficulty when you consider the situation. I always like the parallel with the decision that had to be taken by Chancellor Helmut Kohl when he had to preside over the reunification of the two Germanys, and particularly of the two German economies, merging everything in one single Deutschmark. You remember that cartoon of the newspaper Le Monde on that day, where you had the front of a big Mercedes cut in the middle, and on the other side you had the front of a little Trabant attached to each other. That was fantastic. In just one cartoon you had a description of the German economic situation. Well, it's a bit the same that we were, the situation we had to confront with some enlargement. We were not ready, they were not ready. We may have accepted a bit too fast, and that has generated a lot of problems, a lot of frustration, not only in Europe, but also in the former candidate countries, a lot of difficulties. So that has indeed pushed the Belgian political class to be more strict. It doesn't mean that we are close to enlargement, but indeed we would like that there is a rather strict respect of the criteria that are being set by the Commission and by the EU in general.
Amiral.
Chef de cabinet, Amiral Rosier de l'Association Euro-Atlantique de Belgique. It was very enlightening, dear Chef de cabinet, to hear your thoughts on the Westerwelle report and to come to a conclusion that economic governance would lead to sovereignty aspects to be given up. Could you say something about the security and defense policy? Since in 2013 we will have for the first time a Council on Defense Matters, and is in that case the model of concentric circles a possible model, since we see that the Lisbon Treaty, which les coopérations structurées permanentes, is not giving at the moment any real result. So could you just elaborate on that other difficult sovereignty aspect of the Member States?
Thank you, Admiral. I mean, this is music to my ears, since in one of my previous functions, I used to be what we say in Belgian diplomatic vocabulary, Paul Mill director. So I love particularly these issues, and I'm particularly happy that you ask me about that. It is indeed one of the important issues that we are facing indeed on our diplomatic agenda. And again, this morning, when the two ministers from Netherlands and Belgium met, it was a prominent topic on their agenda. It is quite true that for many years of existence of CSDP, we can have, let's say, a mixed conclusion. Some progress were undoubtedly made. I refer particularly to the civilian missions of CSDP, where definitely EU not only pioneered, but also was able to establish its reputation far from Europe, and as really giving some sort of added value to the contribution to stabilization. At the beginning, it was extremely difficult to work with our American friends on CSDP. They were rather hesitant. They did not understood well what was the reality of CSDP, and certainly not what kind of added value the EU would bring there. But the situation has completely changed. And it was even at the time of George Bush Jr., during his second term, that the US completely shifted their view towards CSDP and towards civilian missions. They recognized the value of the EU there. They even asked us to have a few of their police officers or legal officers taking part in civilian missions of the EU, particularly in Kosovo, and the request came also for Central Africa. Now, that is one positive point. The very negative point is the capabilities. And everybody knows that as far as we are talking about military CSDP, we have in front of us two issues. The first one is capabilities, and the second one is articulation with NATO. But basically, when you consider them in detail, they are closely intertwined. Capabilities is really issue number one, in the sense that it is no longer feasible, and as an admiral, you know that better than me, it is no longer feasible for EU member states in the future, and certainly now with the budget deficits that we know and the budget savings that we have to go through, to develop new systems of weapons and to equip each of our respective armed forces with all aspects of what armed forces could cover as a mission. It is no longer feasible, simply. Budget-wise, it will no longer be feasible. We will have to work together, and we will be forced to do so by the budget constraints. There was, a few months ago, if you remember well, what we call the Ghent spirit, after an informal meeting of defense ministers of the EU, where the idea of pooling and sharing was launched. Minister de Crème was there, actually the chairman, as Belgium rotating presidency. It was a fantastic spirit in the sense that it launched quite a new concept of pooling and sharing among armed forces. It is not exactly properly described in the press. That tends to say that there are two movements, one that is bottom-up with initiatives coming from member states, and one that is top-down with the measures and programs proposed by EDA. It's not true, because what comes from EDA is also a bottom-up program, since EDA is there just a facilitator. But it's true that we have to achieve among member states, and particularly among armed forces of member states, a better sense of confidence to work with each other. We in Belgium, we have already several examples for the Navy, for the Air Force training. Navy is, of course, with Netherlands. Air Force pilot training is with France. For the A400M that we share with other European partners, and more particularly with Luxembourg, since in the fleet of Belgian A400M there will be one Luxembourg aircraft. And we have the EATC and EATF program that will further organize this European cooperation. So there are examples. It can work, and it actually does work. But we need a bit of courage to realize that our armed forces will no longer be able to do everything by themselves, and that they will have to rely on the others. I know that there are sensitive issues. Recently, I had a conversation with a Belgian general who told me it would be inconceivable to send a Belgian detachment outside, let's say in Afghanistan, with, for instance, a hospital, a medical backup coming from Netherlands, or coming from France, or from Hungary, whatever. It would be unthinkable. Why would it be unthinkable? I mean, we have to learn to work together. And why would it be inconceivable when we have to, for instance, think of an evacuation? This is, by the way, among the Petersberg tasks, so it's perfectly understandable under CSDP. Why would it be unthinkable to have 2 or 3 member states of the EU countries joining their force to organize the evacuation of one particular population of expats in one country? I mean, we still have a lot to do in terms of mentality. Capability is definitely issue number one. Second issue is NATO, and there you know that there is the big issue of Turkey-Cyprus. That is a problem, But I'm afraid to say that the issue of Turkey-Cyprus is just, as we say in French, un arbre qui cache la forêt. There is a lot behind that of unwillingness to cooperate. But I think that we have one prospect there. This is something that is already, an old expression, but the famous EU pillar inside NATO. This is the only solution for the future. I think we will all have to work in that direction in order to realize that EU pillar inside NATO. And that will be the success for our cooperation among EU member states. It is feasible. There are a lot of possibilities that I hear around me, but I think that a lot of courage is still needed. Thank you.
Well, before passing to the official opening proper of the academic year, and I promise you it will be very, very short. We're going to shorten what we had foreseen. I would ask you to express our gratitude to this speaker by your very hard applause.